Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are coming to the end of Beyond Order and really looking forward to this one. Immediately after this, we are going into the Bible studies. So I'm really looking forward to that one as well. All right, so we're doing Rule 11 and we are going to start, folks. So the format is as follows. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to share what you got from this chapter. Everybody is welcome to share. Try to be brief. You get about 3 minutes to talk about what you got from the chapter. Just focus on the most important things, okay? After everybody has had a chance to speak, then we are going to go into the breakout rooms. We have a small set of questions to ask about resentment and arrogance and deception. After doing the breakout rooms for about 20 minutes, we're going to come back here and you come back with the best question you can possibly muster. And we will collect all the questions and then we're going to do this lightning round of answers. All right, so that's the plan. So let's get started. It's time for Claire and the kittens.
Hi everyone, I've missed you all. So as requested, I have a foster cat that just had kittens yesterday. So this is a 1-day-old little baby. She had 5 of them. But in the spirit of always petting a cat on the street when you meet one. So I'm gonna go put her back because mommy is very mad. And then I'll kick off. I'll be right back.
All right, if Claire doesn't come back, you know how powerful mothers can be.
Okay, now we can focus on the important stuff. So today we are talking about resentment. So the chapter is entitled, "Do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant." And one of the things that I've realized about myself very recently is that I'm a very big sabotager. So it always surprises me how quickly a good day can turn into a bad one. One day you are totally on top of the world and you're wondering what everyone else's problem is. And then the next day you want to sabotage. One thing goes wrong and I feel the need not only to characterize everything else in my life as bad, but also to actively want to destroy or disrupt those other parts of myself. If I've had a tough day at work, it's time for a drink. If I've had a tough conversation with my mom, it's time to lash out at my friends. But this chapter, it challenges us to not give in to that temptation of sabotage. Life is a story, as Peterson says, but it's not a fairy tale. Our societies tend toward corruption and our own individual psyches tend toward evil. And we really have 2 choices then. We get to decide which side we lean into. In this chapter, Peterson is encouraging us to face life head on, to replace the anger of the tragedy of being with gratitude and with truth, to be the hero of our story, knowing that heroes have bad days too. Then, and only then, do we have the best chance of keeping at bay the elements of ourself and of nature that turn us against the world. Thank you all, and I look forward to this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Claire. Who would like to go next? Go ahead and type exclamation mark to share what you got from this chapter. Focus only on the highlights, the most important things that you got personally from the chapter. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. The rules remain the same. Type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Keep on topic, be brief. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything. Just do so courteously. Next up is going to be Joe, Becky, and Maritza. Joe.
Yeah, in this particular chapter, I would like to focus on the resentment aspect of it, because I thought that was the most poignant for me in particular, how he starts out in defining what resentment is as a combination of anger, self-pity, and narcissism, people that are seeking revenge. And there's reasons to feel anger. And there's reasons to feel resentment because of the social structures and the way nature of the world. It's a very harsh world, as Claire was saying, but the thing is we're our own worst enemies often. And that was one of the key points that he had pointed out, is that, and I think he breaks it down into two different people, like how people can, people who fall prey to resentment, and people who are no longer resentful and are able to stave it off. And it basically comes down to the question of why me, and how we're, answering that question. When you ask yourself, why me, it could be, why me? And for a good reason, you're doing self-examination, you're looking introspectively, and you're answering that question, and you're getting to the source of the problems. But the other part would be, looking at yourself as a victim. And that's where, it may result in certain bad behavior. So, one of the things that he offers as an antidote to being angry, or narcissistic, or the self-pity, is to take a step back and to understand that it's not about you per se. This was a random occurrence. And once you can take that perspective, that the universe isn't working against you, and that other people are actually going through something similar, then you're able to have an approach, to develop a strategy, to change your thinking about the world. And I really thought his strategy was really kind of interesting, in that it kind of mimicked Stoicism in a way. What is in your control and what is not in your control. He does like what is your fault, and what is just plain bad luck. So that's kind of, I saw a little bit of the dichotomy of control there, where he applies to that particular area. And once you're able to engage with this resentment, or understand in this way voluntarily, that you start to develop the courage to overcome your resentment with all the to all the problems that you're dealing with. And this will allow you to be less resentful, have more meaningful relationship, less anger, less deceit, and you actually are developing a certain amount of empathy, because you're going through a process when you're doing this. But I think that you have to be authentically going through it, where you're being honest with yourself and you're really evaluating yourself, and then you become less resentful. So the key takeaway is that somebody that enters into this voluntarily, where they challenge themselves and they have the courage to challenge themselves, they're able to stave off resentment. And I think that actually leads to it makes it less likely that you'll be deceitful and arrogant. And because it's, if you are resentful, he even speaks about it. There are some people that not only say, why me? But if you really think about it, would you say, why not someone else? Why not your friend that has cancer instead of you having cancer? That's almost the opposite way of looking at it. I won't go down that road too long. But anyway, that was the resentful aspect of it. I thought was very meaningful to me, because it seemed to outline a process of identifying randomness as the key to the world's not working against you, and you have some control over your destiny. And once you accept that and have the courage to take on your challenges, then you're able to be less resentful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Folks, it would be very interesting to know which of these three you found most interesting. Resentfulness, deceit, or arrogance. So whatever discussion you found most interesting, just go ahead and type that. So resentment, deceit, and arrogance. So type in chat which one you found most interesting. All right, next up is going to be Becky, Maritza, and Jyoti. Becky.
So like Joe, I found resentment really interesting in this chapter as well. And so I'll be talking about resentment, but more on the victimhood. And Joe had mentioned the randomness part. I'm going to talk about the complement where it's not so random. Mm-hmm. So how do we get to the point of being resentful? It's how we choose to respond when we are deprived of something we feel entitled to. Sometimes it results from a mismatch between our arrogance and society's evaluation, to which our resentment does not warrant sympathy. But other times our indignation is justified. For example, the death of a child's innocence. So we enter the world naive and trusting, usually protected by responsible adults in our walled paradise. At some point, we have our first encounter with the snake in the garden, which shatters our naive view of the world. We discover what it's like to be hurt from randomness, like Joe had mentioned with disease, or not so random, such as intentional infliction of suffering due to malevolence from others. And through our pain, we learn that we too can inflict pain onto others, and that good and evil not only exists externally in the world, but also within each of us. Now, how do we proceed to interact with the world after experiencing the latter? After tyrannical forces have taken away options for escape, and you no longer have a choice but to endure suffering. You cannot change the past, but how you choose to respond to the present will dictate the future. And your negative emotions are more than understandable, but if you let resentment take hold of you and accept victimhood in the present, you've locked yourself into the past by saying, I had no control then, and I am not responsible now. What you have done is stolen your own future. And the fact is, being victimized does not doom you to resentment. And on 339, Peterson writes, how could you fail to feel victimized and resentful under those conditions? Life contains no shortage of fundamental brutality. The first is that not everyone does in fact construe him or herself as a victim and fall prey in consequence to resentment. And that includes a large portion of people who have had a very hard time in their lives. In fact, I think it is reasonable to posit that it is often the people who have had too easy a time, who have been pampered and elevated falsely in their self-esteem, who adopt the role of victim and the mean of resentment. You can encounter people contrarily who have been hurt virtually beyond all hope of repair, who are not resentful and who would not deign to present themselves as victims. They are not that common, but they are not very rare either. Thus, resentment does not appear to be an inevitable consequence of suffering itself. So what can you do? You can choose to exercise courage and voluntarily confront your past. By learning from the past, you are empowered to protect yourself from reoccurrence. You start to heal and you realize that you are not helpless. Once you've made peace with your past, you can direct your path forward and you can set an aim, and that aim will give you purpose. You'll find that you're not just existing or surviving, which is associated with victimhood, but you're thriving because you've integrated your shadow and you're neither naive nor powerless. With purpose, you find meaning to life. You find meaning in your pain and your suffering, and you can finally feel what it's like to truly live because you choose your future, and you can choose to let malevolence end with you rather than perpetuate it to others through resentment. You not only create a better future for yourself, but you create a better future for the world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. Next up is going to be Maritza, Jyoti, and Jade. Folks, go ahead and type ! To share your thoughts about this chapter. Maritza.
So I was gonna talk about deceit, but I actually want to take a moment and I want to talk about, I found it very jarring how often the word victim was used in the chapter on resentment. And Becky's comments brought that up. It was just a reminder to me that I found it to be very jarring, and I inherently rejected that word. And I know that it's just a word, but it just, to me, I felt in reading it in that manner that it was an acceptance of a perspective that was limiting in our ability to transcend that which we would need to transcend in order to avoid resentment. Like, I feel like, if we're accepting a victimhood upon ourselves, we're not in as stable a footing for getting beyond that. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents on that, the concept of, victim versus, survivor, because I think, we are all survivors of life, as it were. Peterson there's a quote he does say in the resentment section. He says, the fact that unfortunate things are happening or are going to happen to you is built into the structure of reality itself. So in other words, there's no actual way to avoid this fact. And then he tells us, you are resentful because of the absolute unknown and its terrors, because nature conspires against you, because you are a victim of the tyrannical element of culture, and because of the malevolence of yourself and other individuals. And I think that the path, the key towards not being our fate lies in the change of perspective. If we view ourselves not as victims, but as something else, I think it would be easier to rise above this resentfulness. Okay, but the concept actually of this chapter that was most intriguing to me was the concept that a lack of faith in yourself is a sin of omission. And I mean, again, maybe I'm getting a little too lost in the allure of words, right? But the word sin has this like deep, abiding, and enduring negative connotation. So a sin of omission. I love that strength of phraseology associated with a lack of faith in yourself, because it shines a spotlight again on how the necessity to change one's perspective is the key to so many things in our lives. Because and he even says, even perhaps in humanity in general. So a lack of faith in yourself or in humanity is a sin of omission. And in dwelling in this land of sin of omission, we are again limiting ourselves and our ability to transcend, this concept of deceit. I have been on a kick for the last 2 months. Any of my friends, whenever we say anything, I'll just look at them and I'll raise my eyebrow and be like, the lies we tell ourselves. And this section specifically brought that to mind, because we spend so much of our lives lying to ourselves, even when we don't mean to, or even if, like, at our most honest, we are still trying to soften the blow of reality to ourselves. And I think what I'm seeing in this chapter that is so enticing to me is this idea that if we are aware that it exists, we can actively work towards ensuring it doesn't become overly problematic. So, you know, this concept of, if we look at it from a religious aspect, this concept of this like sin, right? The concept of sin is that nobody is without it. So that right there takes a huge amount of pressure off of us. You're not special, meaning you're not especially worse than other people by engaging in this sin of omission, because your neighbor to your left and your neighbor to the right is also engaging in this sin of omission. But where you can perhaps transcend is by being aware that this is something that's happening, and perhaps in that manner, you can transcend it and find whatever your flavor of contentment looks like. You can maybe at least see it, even if you can't get there quite just yet. And I find that this, it ties nicely with the idea of rejecting the concept of being a victim. Because if we reshape our perspectives continually, I view it as these three concepts that he's talked to us about, you know, resentment, deceit, arrogance. It's all about your perspective. If we get stuck in any one view, that's where we find ourselves falling into these three traps, because these are traps, and they are a deviance from reality. And so this balance is necessary, and we can find that by continually questioning ourselves, seeking to be aware of where it is that we're falling too long to one side. And so that's, I don't know, I'm sorry guys, I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place, but those are just my thoughts here on this chapter. Thank you.
Maritza, that was fantastic. I mean, I really like the idea of perspectives, because like you can see how, like, for example, if you regard yourself as victim, then you've just surrendered all ability that you have. In that one conception, you have surrendered all the initiative, all the power that you have of doing anything, because you're just blaming it on others and the world. And you just, it's also very similar to your idea of lies we tell ourselves. Because again, that, you know, because like you could actually figure out what's going on, but because you're lying to yourself, you have just given up. Just like the concept of victim, you've just given up. And it's the perspective, because you kind of sabotaged yourself right from the base. And the thing that will make you fix things, that's finished right there. I think the sin of omissions has something to do with it too, rather than sin of commission. You know, what is it that you did not do? Somewhat it is related to this one, which I couldn't quite figure out how, but it's all of those are like perspective. So great points. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jyoti, Jade, Jean, and Claire. Jyoti.
Okay, what I'm going to talk about.
He saw the cats. He saw the kittens.
That's what it is. No, I think I left the windows open today.
Okay.
And there are, there's a little bit traffic.
That's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, well, it's almost like a segue to what Maritza said. I have often wondered in my life, the people who are deceitful and arrogant, where are they going with this? Are they realizing what it is doing to them? So I think this paragraph, these few pages, they really grab my attention, because Peterson explains very well the psychology and what is happening to these people, and they are not even aware of the dangers. So this is the existential danger of arrogance and deceit. If you understand that deception corrupts and distorts the function of the most fundamental instinct that guides you through the difficulties of life, That prospect should scare you enough so that you remain careful in what you say and do. The truthful person can rely on his or her instinct or innate sense of meaning and truth as a reliable guide to the choices that must be made through life's days, weeks, and years. But there is a rule that applies. The same rule that computer program well-known garbage in, garbage out. If you deceive particularly yourself, if you lie, that like Maritza said, then you begin to warp the mechanism guiding that instinct that orients you. That instinct is an unconscious guide, so it works underneath your cognitive apparatus, especially once it has become habitual. If you rewire the unconscious mechanism that maintains you with an assumption derived from something you know as be unreal, then your meaningful instinct will take you places you should not go in proportion to its corruption. There is a little more terrifying than the possibility that you could come to a certain crisis point in your life when you need every faculty you possess in that moment to make the decision properly, only to find you have pathologized yourself with deceit and can no longer rely on your judgment. Good luck to you, because nothing but luck will only serve you better. So I thought that was very meaningful. Then he goes on to say, I'm not going to read, because we are going to do the Bible, so I'm not going to read that part. Conscience is no less than sharing of the moral knowledge with the self. Deceit necessitates voluntary refusal to abide by the dictates of conscience and risks pathologizing that very vital function. There is no walking away from the corruption unscathed. This is true even in the neurological sense. Drugs of addiction are generally characterized by the effects upon the neurotransmitter dopamine, increasing its effect in some manner. Dopamine essentially produces the pleasure associated with the hope or possibility. Furthermore, your brain is wired so that you do sometimes that feels good and therefore produces a dopamine kick, then the parts of you that played a role in the action under question become stronger, more dominant, more able to inhibit the function of the other parts of your being. Continued use of an addictive drug therefore feeds the growth of what can be accurately conceptualized as a living monster in the other's psyche, and the attention and inattention of that monster is single-mindedly devoted to, sorry, my eyes are a little bit watering, to the drug's effects. It wants one thing and it comes armed with an entire philosophy about why the one thing must be considered a primary import. So I thought that was so well said, that your dopamine, which is a good feel good reward system, that becomes a dominant part rather than your own self inside. So you become addictive to it. You never get rid of it. So I thought that was very well said. Imagine you are recovering fragility from addiction. Sometimes goes wrong in your life. Resentment emerges. You think, oh no, hell with it. And so the initial event leading to refuse of the drug and the experience of the subsequent dopamine hit. In consequence, the little circuits that formulate the thought to hell with it grows more powerful than the parts of the addict's psyche that might be motivating refusal to use the drug. To hell with it is a male-faceted philosophy. It means that is worth sacrificing anything for it. It means who cares about my life? It is not worth anything anyway. It means I do not care if I have to do, if I have to lie to those who love me, my parents, my wife, my children, because what difference does it make anyway? What I want is the drug. There is no easy coming back from it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Jade, Jean, Claire, and Mary. Jade.
I don't know. I feel like this is a huge, multifaceted, multi-layered topic with so many different things to consider that I can't possibly do in like a minute or two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on a few points that people have brought up in their comments, and then I'm going to read something because I actually wrote to someone specifically about resentment, and it was a religious leader. And I'll give a little more context about that after. I feel like I work with a lot of angry, resentful kids, and I don't know, listening to all of this, it kind of makes me a little angry and resentful because I've seen that shift. I've seen kids who meet me and I am the symbol of everything they can't stand. And it has nothing to do with me and everything with the position and the power they believe I'm going to try and hold over them. And the moment I don't do what they think I'm going to do or treat them in the way they suspect I'm going to treat them in, it all changes. It goes from like an environment of resentment and anger to an environment of like cooperation and consideration. So it's like we want to make people victims, but we got to understand it takes two to tango. Like sometimes people are just, oh, woe is me, but sometimes there are people who are legitimately doing things to people. So it's like I want to, like, I think we really need to be like, I have an issue with the word victim too, because I feel like I have friends who victimize their daughters. And like, I'm like, no, let man up. And they're kind of like, no, she can't. But I'm like, yes, she can. She has two legs. Like, let her stand on them. But at the same time, I'm preaching the other side because there's a balance to almost everything. And it's like, I'm with Maritza with that word victim. It kind of bugs me, but it kind of bugs me for slightly different reasons. And I think it's also because victim can be used to disenfranchise somebody's struggle. And it often is used. And I feel like that's somewhat how it's used right here a lot of the time, as though it's just in your head. It's a perception. Like you're just viewing the situation wrong. Nothing's really happening to you. And that's a dangerous place to be, like initially. Like, again, after consideration, maybe, but just for that to be a knee-jerk reaction when you come across any resentful person, I don't know about that. Then there's a part where I'm just gonna take myself straight to the one thing that Joe said that also made me think was the why me, then why anyone else. But I think I tend to be on more of a situation of why anyone? Why is anyone going through this? Why does anyone, and there are things from nature. Okay, fine, I can't necessarily deal with that. But when it's man to man, we have control over that. That's why we say that we are this enlightened, upper sentient being above everybody, because we can make decisions about our actions. And that's exactly what this book is about. But I feel like Jordan Peterson is letting those people who aren't making those decisions and are electing to be malicious off the hook. And that's what old school people used to do. It used to be about virtues. Ambition checks ambition. That's what our country actually was founded on personal levels, professional levels. When you see something, you should be able to say something and speak up. And that should be, your words should mean something. But anyway, before I end up on a pedestal, putting myself on like a podium and a soapbox, I'm just going to read what I wrote. And this was to a religious leader, actually a pastor, who was talking about messianic archetypes. And he's preaching to a population that has a lot of power and a lot of money. And so it kind of got under my skin that he's talking about messianic archetypes when none of those people that he's preaching to are messianic archetypes. He's elevating them and saying how much better they were. I can't explain the whole thing, but it was problematic. And in my view, and I decided to say something. We're going to call him Bubba. So, Bubba, I hear you. Kindness is important, and promoting kindness as a theoretical concept of action is great. But we need to facilitate the transition from theories of kindness to the actual practice of good works that are capable of producing beneficial outcomes. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Our approach to kindness needs to be realistic, holistic, practical, and implementable. Our church often validates expressions of anger and resentments toward God, but shuts down or reframes conversations about anger directed towards other human beings. Why is that? Resentment is largely a misunderstood and stigmatized emotional state of being. Life is devastating for everyone on varying degrees, and I feel for everyone with a righteous reason to be resentful, because resentment is a sign that an individual has been denied acts of compassion when they needed compassion the most. Resentment is a complex emotion elicited by insult, injustice, or unmet needs. A compassionate person recognizes suffering in others and takes action to relieve that suffering. Compassionate people recognize that people don't just wake up deciding to be resentful for the rest of their lives. Something happened to that resentful person that should have been addressed, but was not addressed. There is strength in resentment. At its core, resentment is a trauma response, and I don't like that term, but it's in vogue. Trauma response and defense mechanism. Anger is often an expression of love and a desire to protect. So if we want less anger and resentment in the world, we need to stop giving people reasons to be angry and resentful. We need to do a better job of listening to the grievances of others with open minds and open hearts. We need to be willing to take the grievances brought before us seriously enough to address them, instead of trivializing or dismissing their concerns. In closing, the world can use more people who are kind enough, compassionate enough, and genuinely acknowledge kind enough and compassionate enough to genuinely acknowledge and address the resentment born of dehumanization, epistemic violence, without judgment. People have suffered enough. They don't need to suffer through the guilt and of our judgment about their resentment as well. And all of that is loaded. So people can, I know there are going to be people who are just going to disagree with me. There's not a lot of time to talk about it. So it could be miscontextualized too. But I think the only thing I want people to get from anything that I just said is just be careful. Just be careful anytime because that even can be a defense mechanism of yourself to decide that someone's just resentful. I didn't do anything, they're just resentful. Like we need to listen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jade. And I really like the passion and the clarity with which you push things. So this is just great. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jean, Claire, Mary, and Brian. And somewhere in the middle, I'm going to call upon Victor. So let's start with Jean.
Yeah, I think resentful, I want to talk about resentful too. I think it's kind of a two sides of the coin. You know, there's a reason people are resentful, and there's a bigger society environment. And there also personal control over how you, I think, you know, I like what Jade was talking about because I didn't think that way before. It's kind of interesting. I think that's the great about discussion, you know, because I observed, I remember when I was at Washington State University graduate school, and there's a professor who's very kind and invite us to the Thanksgiving dinner. And she also invited a single mom with a few kids, like 2-3 kids, and also there was graduate students. And I noticed, so the professor's kids also pretty young, like elementary kids. And so then the other single mom's kids, the similar age, but their kids are so nice and kind, very friendly, but the other kids very angry and very, you know, like very mean. So I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. If I wonder, you know, I'm very touched by the professor. He's kind to invite everybody there. But I was like, why these kids are so mean? You know, it's like, if I'm the professor, do I want to expose my kids to these kids? But I can understand because maybe they were at very mean environment. So they were create this kind of like reaction to the environment. That's how they react, even though they are in a safer place now, but they may not know, you know, maybe. So it's kind of interesting, you know. So I can understand where Jade come from, you know, a lot of time, especially when you're young, you know, all the problem, social problem, I think it's come from when people are young, you know, people are denied of love. They usually cannot give love. You know, that's why my grandparents used to say, you know, you have to give kids enough love so they can love back to the other people in the future. So on the other side, you know, we can't really control the society. We can't change the environment. What we have, when I read the flow, I realized the better control we have is more personal control.
So we can't change our experience, but we can change our interpretation. So personally, I reject to be victimized, and I don't want my kids to. I really don't like the too much political emphasis in school right now. And my kids was assigned this politics, social study, Asian hate, like in the past. I emailed the teacher, I said, I don't want my kids to victimize. He can pick whatever topic he is. We come here as an immigrant because America is a big country. We should emphasize more on the similarity than the difference. Anyway, so some of my Asian friends or Chinese friends don't agree with me on this. I said kids can study when they voluntarily want to confront their race when they're older, but when they're young, I don't want them identify and victimize themselves with the history. So I don't think it's healthy for them. Once they have grown up, have a very healthy, view of life, then they can expose to more injustice. So they don't limit it by the view. That's my personal feeling, So they can choose to study once they're older, like high school or college. But I don't want them to define themselves as race when they're younger. I really think this is a problem we are facing right now. It's dividing people, it's not united. And we have so many races in the country right now. And I don't think it's helpful at all. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jean. So what we're going to do next is Claire, then Victor, Mary, Brian, and Mike. Claire.
I just wanted to follow up on this deceit part and Maritza talking about the lies we tell ourselves. Jyoti already read this passage, but I really love this idea of when you start to tell these lies to yourself at the moment where you most need them and you will most need to make a hard decision, you won't be able to trust your judgment. And I think that is really interesting, that it's easy to go through life telling these little life lies, but when push comes to shove and when you can really you need to rely on your judgment, you've then degraded it. It's just something, a future state to keep in mind.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so we're going to go for Victor's presentation, followed by Mary, Brian, and Mike. Victor.
Yeah, Shrikant, I need sharing permissions. I don't think I have them right now.
Sorry, give me just a second.
So while we're going to that,
go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so tonight's rule is do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Maritza made a very good point about sin of omission, and Peterson talks about the idea of sin of omission and how we blind ourselves to one side of ourselves, especially the negative side of ourselves, and we become a victim. And as he discusses that, he discusses this story of Maleficent, and he makes a good point about how we becoming blind to a particular area in ourselves can hurt us. So this particular story discusses the same thing, and let's look into that. In a far, far land away, a king and his fair queen longed a child. Finally, their wish was granted, and they named their child Aurora, because she filled their life with sunshine. From her home high on the Forbidden Mountain, Maleficent watches as the king's subjects arrive at the castle to celebrate the birth of the princess. Maleficent has not been invited to the celebration, and this makes her angry. In a flash of green fire, she transports herself into the castle. She says to the king, "I really felt quite distressed at not receiving the invitation. But however, I bring a gift to the child. Listen well. The princess shall indeed grow in grace and beauty, beloved by whoever she knows. But when the sun sets on her 16th birthday, she shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel and die." Maleficent crackles. King gets angry, and just before when King's guards could seize her, she disappears. Now, King is worried about Maleficent, and he knows the great power of Maleficent, and he doesn't doubt, and he knows that the curse is going to come true. He decides to send his daughter away to be cared by good fairies, Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. The fairies wasted no time. They disguised themselves as peasants and took the baby where no one could ever see. 16 years passed, and the princess grew into a beautiful, happy girl named Brian Rose. And she doesn't know that she actually is a princess. And her aunts are not actually aunts, but they are good fairies. And while she is in the woods, she finds Princess Philip, and she falls in love with him. And during this time, Maleficent tries to find the princess. Her henchmen assured that they looked everywhere on the land and they couldn't find her. At last, Maleficent talks to her raven, and she says, "You are my last hope. Go and find the princess and do not fail me." And during this time, something strange happens in the woods. So in the woods, on the day of her 16th birthday, good fairies were preparing a celebration for Aurora's 16th birthday. They put away their magical wand. For all these 16 years, they put away the magical wand because they don't want to get any attention from Maleficent. But on the day of, Princess Aurora, she actually goes on a walk. And during that time, the fairies, they actually open their wands and make some magic. This actually attracts the raven. The raven looks, and he comes to the magic, and he looks at the magic chimney, and he finds Princess Aurora and 3 fairies. And he also finds that Princess Aurora actually fell in love with Prince Philip, and she is about to go back to her home. And Raven picks up all this information and goes and tells to Maleficent. So back at the castle, King Stefan and Queen awaits for daughter's return. It was Aurora's 16th birthday. When the sun sets, the princess would be free from Maleficent's curse. The fairies take Aurora to the castle and get her into the room. The girl asks everyone to leave her alone for a few minutes. Fairies think that she is safe and agrees to leave her alone, but she is not alone. Maleficent was waiting for her. In a green orb, she appears, putting the prince into a trance, unable to stop herself. Aurora followed the orb and passes through the secret panel, and the fairies were unable to get to her. Then she slowly steps up into the dark, winding staircase. She finds herself in a room of a spinning wheel with a spindle. Maleficent's voice fills the room, and she says, "Touch it, touch the spindle," and she commands. And then Aurora obeys. When the fairies finally come, finally come to the room, they'll find Maleficent waiting for them. And Maleficent says, "You poor simple fools, you thought you could defeat me, but I am the mistress of all evil, and here is your precious princess." And she moves her cloak aside and to see the still body of Aurora. But Aurora, in actuality, is not dead. For the fairy Merryweather had softened the curse, and the curse now is whenever Aurora touches the spindle, she goes into a deep sleep, and she can only be awakened by a true love kiss. And now we have the story set up, meaning we have Princess Aurora, and we have the princess, her lover, and he will have to come and kiss her. And this Maleficent doesn't like it, so she will have to stop. So during this time, actually, I'm cutting short the story because it's a huge story. So fairies actually give princess two main powers: the power of the shield of virtue and the sword of truth. And now princess knows about it, and he goes back into the kingdom and he fights Maleficent, where she becomes a dragon, and he fights and he kills Maleficent, and then comes back, kisses Princess Aurora, and everything will be fine again. So this whole story revolves around these few concepts. At first, the father of Princess, he has this willful blindness towards Maleficent. He doesn't actually invite her to the party. Actually, the idea of Maleficent represents the idea of shadows, the darker side of us. And if we are blind towards it, it finds its way into our life, and the error happens, and we will have to face the consequences. Although the consequences are really bad, there is always hope, and there are things to improve. And when we improve, when we do the right thing, things will resolve. So that's for tonight.
Thank you, Victor. Sorry, folks, I had to grab something to eat. Next up is going to be Mary, Brian, and Mike. Mary.
Excuse me if I have gaps in my sharing, because I just started joining this group as of like last week. And so I only read the most recent chapters of the book. So I just wanted to start off by saying a really short comment. And I'm not sure if Peterson covered this, but in previous chapters, but what stood out to me in the chapters from tonight is that that he says that people like who were sheltered from evil and adversity and perhaps had an elevated sense of self, like developed perhaps like this resentment and fear and you know, this maybe habit or tendency towards self-deceit, etc. But I think he should have included things like, or maybe he did include like the socialization aspect of childhood and how some people are raised to be kind, and then that also can create like a child who's vulnerable to malevolence in the world. Yeah, so I just thought that he missed that point. And then the second thing that stood out to me is how he describes that when he's, you know, I think he's a psychologist or psychiatrist, that he thinks it's important to start to constrain like the resentment and the malevolence in our own hearts. And I think that's the hardest work of all in life. And that he recognizes that by giving encouragement to his patients, because it does take courage to confront our shadow. And it's, you know, this process is significant, I think, for many reasons. Like if we look at the word sin, it's I think the etymology of the word sin is off the mark. And so it would make sense that like the examples he gives, like not believing yourself would be a sin, as well as like maybe taking out my anger on someone is also a sin. And so like, I think it's not such an archaic thing to like acknowledge and confess our sins, because in doing that and acknowledging that, it robs us, if we don't do that, it robs us of the opportunity to like love ourselves more. You know, like in the case of believing in myself, if that's a sin, then, you know, by acknowledging that, then I can address that and love myself more. And the hardest part, I think, of doing that process of like acknowledging our own like deceit towards ourselves or ignoring our dark side is that we miss that opportunity of learning how to forgive ourselves, which is super, super hard. And by not doing that, then we will never be able to forgive others, and we will just all be in so much pain from other people's pain from the past, and we would all just be blaming ourselves. And I think that's what he means by victimhood, is that if we don't acknowledge our own malevolence, which comes from our pain, then we would all just be blaming each other and not extending grace to each other, which we need to elevate you know, whatever's happening in the world to a higher level of love. And, you know, if I can do that on a regular basis, then I can release my resentment and my arrogance and my revenge. And I think it's important to remind oneself that in order to do that, it's important to not label oneself as malevolent at the core, or that the world or other people are malevolent at the core. And that it's our actions that need to be acknowledged, and not to judge ourselves and others. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. So I want to just say a couple of things. I mean, all my meetups are designed so that people who are just discovering the topic that we're discussing can get value from it and should feel free to speak. And people who know topic a lot should also get a lot of value from it. The second thing I want to say is that almost all topics that we talk about, things like the topics we're talking about today, like resentment, for example, are human phenomena. So if you're observant, even if you don't know anything about what the particular take that we have by Jordan Peterson, you will have thoughts about resentment. And in some ways, you can bring something to the table which everybody else might miss, because we are approaching the topic through a particular angle. And you may be able to, just by being observant, you may be able to provide a perspective. So everybody is welcome to attend any meetup, even if you know very, very little about the topic. And I have found that actually many of the interesting questions and comments come from people who are just trying to figure things out, because they don't carry the full context of that. So you know, people are always welcome to that. I just wanted to say that. Next up is going to be, yeah, you're welcome. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Mike and Jade. Brian.
So I'd like to think my comments are limited to focusing on 3 words: entitlement, righteous indignation, being mean, and forgiveness. And each of those has been raised by another person here. I thank Mary for bringing up forgiveness. Nobody else had before that, and explaining very nicely how it fits in. The entitlement was the first one that came up from Becky, and I could really relate to that, because a lot of the hopes and dreams that I had in the past, you know, I tried to turn into plans and projects and success, but that doesn't always happen. So life's a game, and you know, sometimes you win and sometimes you win 80%, sometimes you win 30%. Excuse me. But if ever I felt the resentment, for me, came from when I felt entitled to have my wish, dream, expectation fulfilled as an entitlement. So I think if we give up on that entitlement, that's a very, very useful tool. The next thing I thought was really great was Jade was talking what I would call this righteous indignation. The resentment can be righteous indignation. And to me, the resentment is you're angry that someone has done something bad to you, and then you're resentful. But the righteous indignation is that someone has done something bad. And it might have happened to have been done to you too, but these people or this person is also doing it to others. And you recognize that, and you are indignant about it. And you are willing to work to put an end to it, not for what you have suffered, but what for others have suffered, are suffering, or may suffer in the future. And I can give examples of that from my own past. Basically, you know, bad things that other people have done that happen to have impacted me. They didn't do it to me. That's just the way they were. And I was around or in the way. And so it doesn't pay to be resentful about that. But righteous indignation, I think, is appropriate. And it can be appropriate then to try to do something to keep that person from doing it to other people. The other thing that kind of, by the way, was Jane talking about the meanness she saw in children. And I just, I want to echo that because I've been working a lot with contractors lately to try to fix up my house, and contractors from all backgrounds, levels of education. Some have had difficult backgrounds, I'm sure, criminal pasts, bad families, and the rest. And the meanness that I hear from some of them to me and that they say to me and to others, I think is also scripts that they play in their minds and they apply to themselves. And I think that they are scripts that they learn from their parents, because the things that they say sound very much like bad parents reprimanding children. So I just, what Jean said, I thought was very, very applicable. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next up, we're going to do, it's going to be Mike followed by Jade, and then we're going to go to breakout rooms. Mike, what did you learn from this chapter?
What did I learn from this chapter? Peterson had a lot of reason in his life to be resentful, deceitful, and arrogant. He lost his tenure, was publicly shamed, and he even lost his health. But he realized after being character assassinated that that he had to rise above it and realize it would be counterproductive to reply in kind. Now, there's lots in the literature of how that similar trait occurred. Machiavelli's book is about resentfulness, deceit, and arrogance, and he tells his advice to the prince is how to be resentful, deceitful, and arrogant in a humble presidential way, and not let that spill over into the overall populace and into his own character. Eisenhower, World War II, had a similar problem to inspire everyone while dealing not only with Field Marshal Montgomery and Patton, but with Hitler and Rommel simultaneously. Walking into things I know not, Krishna in the Gita had a rough life. And he wrote about deceitful and arrogance that brings destruction while humility moves humanity toward greater health and peace. We've read Marcus Aurelius in this thing, and in this group, and Marcus Aurelius, in a way, he's presented as a stoic, but he had to run a government in a very trying time while the Roman Empire was falling apart, and he had to spend time in deprivation and danger while he was at the Danube fighting the barbarians. And his book was an inspiration on how to be resentful, arrogant, and deceitful and put a good face on it and be humble in a presidential way. A few more examples and then I'll go away. The Bible, Matthew, which we're supposed to be going into soon, Matthew in chapter 7 tells about that those three things, resentfulness, deceit, and arrogance, are the big no-nos in the Christian religion. And that offered inspiration to Dante in his description of the circles of hell. One final thing. Today, in today's world, with all our local political trouble, Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, is the Bible of what's going on in our society right now. And he dedicated that book to Lucifer, and he pointed out how to be resentful, deceitful, and arrogant, and do so in a way that is convincing and not tarnished, at least the people he's friendly to. And I will then again yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. I think that was actually very interesting. Kind of looking at things syntopically, of looking at where these issues come up. And the question on my mind, I mean, folks, once we go to the breakout rooms, we're going to come back with questions, biggest question. So one question on my mind is, how are these three things connected? What is common to these three things? But please bring back your own questions. Jade, do you have a short comment before we go to the breakout rooms? Go ahead, Jade.
Yeah, it's short. I think it was the presentation. I grew up watching that movie. I didn't know it was from the 50s, but I grew up watching Sleeping Beauty. And I think it's interesting that now within this conversation, I'm noticing that killing the dragon wasn't enough. It wasn't like the spell was broken just from killing the dragon. It was that kiss, which I'm going to take a leap and say that that's synonymous with love. Like she needed more because she was a shell of herself until she got that kiss. So that's it.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, folks. So Joe, thanks for posting the questions. So the questions we're going to deal with is, first one is, have you experienced resentment, arrogance, or deception within yourself or in others? So that's the first question. The second one, which is a follow-up, how have you dealt with it? You know, what is in principle the solution to it? So those are kind of two thoughts. Have you seen it in yourself or others? And what in principles are the solutions to it? So we're going to do breakout rooms for 20 minutes. People with star in their names are the facilitators who are going to make sure that everybody gets to speak. And then we're going to come back in 20 minutes automatically, and we're going to come back with questions. So come with the biggest question that you have, just one question. And we'll collect all the questions, and we're going to do a lightning round of answers to the questions, starting the breakout rooms now. Excellent. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. All right. All right. So it's time for the big questions. Jean, you're sideways. The all right, okay, that's better. That's better. I was a little bit disoriented. All right, folks. So it's time for the big questions. What are the biggest questions you have? Let's put all of them down. I'm going to keep track of all of them, and then we're going to try to answer as many of them as we possibly can. So if you would like to put a question on the table, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Jyoti, what's your question?
When the resentment is towards yourself, self-resentment.
Wow. Wow. Okay. What is self-resentment and when do you have it and what to do about it? Okay, wonderful. Great, great question. Next up is D. D, what's your question?
How do we change the lies we tell ourselves?
Okay, how do we change lies we tell ourselves?
So that's
So it's not about just different lies, right? How do we stop telling lies ourselves or just change the lies?
Now, how do we get beyond, you know, how
Beyond
do we
lying to ourselves?
stop telling the lies to ourselves?
Wonderful.
So as Maritza would say, you know, the lies to ourselves, well, how do we stop that?
Okay, wonderful. How do we stop telling lies to ourselves? Excellent. Next up is going to be Victor. Victor, what's your question?
Very much related to what T is asking. How do we actually find ourselves lying to ourselves?
Okay. How do we notice that we are lying to ourselves? Very good. Lying. Okay. Folks, ask questions. You get to talk. You're going to get answers from everybody. So don't be shy. Go ahead and ask your questions. How do you notice that we are telling lies? Okay, very good. Next up is Joe, Jean, and Claire. Joe.
How does resentment distort your sense of what is right and what is wrong?
Wonderful. How does resentment distort your sense of right and wrong? Very good. Next up is Jean. Jean.
Yeah, how the entitlement and the belief of fairness distort our view to the world.
Okay, how does entitlement, what did you say? I understand about entitlement. What was the other thing that you said?
And I know we all want to achieve fairness. That's human nature. But at the same time, everybody start at different place, and it seems equal. What do you call that? Equality.
Equality. Okay.
Yeah, how that play a negative role in
negative role. Okay, very good. Excellent. Thank you. Next up is Claire, followed by David. Claire.
Why do these three things feel so good? And how can we push past that emotional element to what we know is like rationally better?
Okay, why do they feel so good and how do we push past to what is rationally better? Okay, I'm going to put the question of what is common to these three things? What is common to these three? Very good. Next up is David. David.
Can resentment be justified and unjustified at the same time?
Very good. Resentment, justified and unjustified. Very good. Unjustified. Okay. Anybody else? D, you had one more question.
Can we stop playing being victimized in order to get rid of the addiction?
Can you repeat the question again?
Can we stop being victimized, playing the role of being victimized in order to eliminate the addiction?
Okay, can we stop being victimized? Okay, very good. Okay, all right. Jeff missed Victor. Victor's question. I'm going to go through all the questions. All right. So let's start with this. I'm going to take the moderator liberty in going to start with my question, because it's about, what is common? Why are these three things being discussed together? What is common to all these things? Before that, I think Brian, you have a question or you have an answer to this one?
No, I did have a question.
Go ahead.
Two possible solutions to experiencing deceit, arrogance, and resentment seem to be seeking justice or forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So how are these two solutions related?
Okay. How about these two?
Seeking justice or giving forgiveness.
Okay. Seeking justice. Okay. Very good. All right. So let's start with just a second. Donna, what does one gain from being arrogant, deceitful, or resentful? Okay, so we're going to take that question. So I'm going to take my question, then Claire's and Donna's question, which look at these three things together. And then we're going to go drill down into other things. So first question, my question is, what is common to these three? Claire's question, you can talk about all these three things together, okay? You can answer any of these three things together. First, what is common to them? Second is, why do they feel so good? And, or what does one gain by being arrogant, deceitful, or resentful? Why do people do it? And the last one is going to be, what is the, how do we push past it? Okay, so let's keep how do we push past it as a follow-up. So what is common to it, and why does it feel good, and what do you gain from these? So at the level of just all these three things together, what can you say about these three things as a unit? Maritza.
So what I find to be common of all three of these is that they are armor for us from a very cruel world. They allow us a little bit of separation from reality and the harsh ugliness of reality. I mean, they feel good for exactly that reason, because they're a step back from this bombardment of reality. And sometimes reality sucks. And so it's nice, it's a nice break. And it allows us to lie to ourselves that it's not what it really is. And what do we gain? We gain a false sense of elevation from what we consider to be an unjust world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Joe, Jyoti, and Jean. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the commonality between the three is the idea of lying to oneself. If you look at the idea of resentment, that you're not being honest with yourself, it requires honesty to overcome your resentment. Therefore, you are resentful because you do lie to yourself. You are deceitful and arrogant because you think you can fool people, and your deception is a form of lying as well. So lying is something that cuts across all three of these. And the arrogance is the idea is that you think you can get away with the lie, is the important part of that. The other thing that is common to them is how to overcome them is to be honest with oneself. And there is there are ways of going about that. It's important to have feedback loops, but we discussed a little bit about that requires a certain amount of courage, where you have a way of actually a methodology by which you're going to start to tackle the problems that what is your fault and what isn't your fault. And then once you're able to discern that reality, then you're able to start to navigate what is meaningful action out of those, out of that process. So I
Joe,
think
that's
there's honestly, yeah.
yeah, Joe, that's fantastic. I think I agree with you. I think it's honesty, which is common to all of
Right.
it. Like resentment is you're lying about whose fault it is, deflecting blame from you in some ways. Deceit is kind of direct lying to yourself, and arrogance is pretending to be more than what you are, without kind of acknowledging, not being honest about your limits and your capabilities. So I think it's all about honesty. They have kind of different manifestations and stuff, but I think the honesty is a core element. That's wonderful. Next up is Jyoti, Jean, and David. Jyoti.
Yeah, I think it's complex, inferiority complex. It's ego. It's feeling of entitlement. I am somebody, and I don't need. I can look down upon you. That is arrogance. Resentment is some anger, built-in anger that is taking a form of resentment. And so basically they are all ego related.
Mm-hmm.
That's some sort of control. You are having control over the outside world in this way. Everybody's, has to account to you.
Wow, that's beautifully put. That's wonderful. So you're pointing to kind of another thing that is common to all these three. It is not just about being dishonest, but it is being kind of willfully dishonest, of saying you're using your ego to blind yourself or to kind of pretend that this is, so it's like, and you're trying to really protect. So at the kind of psychological, like a psychological dynamic level, the thing that is you're doing is that you're trying to protect your ego in all these cases. You're saying, oh, that's their fault. So no, that actually did not happen. And then you're saying that, no, I can do everything. All of it is kind of just protecting of ego. So wonderfully put. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is Jean, David, Brian, and Jeff. Jean.
Yeah, I think from order and chaos point of view, I think they all trying to, like, if you deceive or arrogant, you're pretending everything in order, even though there's chaos, you just pretend you're not seeing the chaos. And then when you're victimized, you see the chaos, but you're pretending you can't do anything. So basically you are the victim of chaos. You don't really confront the dragon to deal with it. So in both cases, so it's like you try to avoid to deal with facing the dragon, basically.
Wonderful. So you're saying in all cases, you are trying to not face the chaos, face the dragon. And all of it are your attempts to protect yourself from it, pretending that the dragon is not there, it is somewhere, somebody else, or, okay, wonderfully put. Thank you. Next up is David, Brian, and Jeff. David.
Yeah, I want to agree with or continue what you said, Shrikant, and what Jean was saying in a more psychological framework. I think it's a matter of how the brain, all three of these and other forms of self-deception, delusion is, what is gained from it? One gains protecting, you can call it the ego, but the personality, basically preventing psychological collapse. This is really about, some people presented this as sort of intentional. I don't think it's always that intentional. We can say, if we were looking objectively, but we know that there, as Jordan Peterson talked about, there is no, truth is subjective. It's how one is observing it. And so I think that a lot of these sorts of dynamics are about a method for people to avoid cognitive dissonance, avoid a problem that they're experiencing, and they can either learn from it, if they are, truly are willing to face the dragon, as Gene was saying, or, face the issue and say, okay, the world didn't conform to how I expected it to conform. And therefore, there's something wrong with my approach. There's something wrong with my knowledge, with my experience, and what can I learn from this? But if a person isn't strong enough to learn from it, or a person doesn't want to, or has some bias, or so fixed in, as I said, with their ego, their self-esteem, anything else, that they can't, incorporate that new knowledge, they will then create a fantasy for themselves in which they were right and the world was wrong.
Wow.
And those fantasies are then this resentment, this deceit, this arrogance. It's a matter of creating some sort of a psychological alternative reality for as long as they can create it, that allows them to remain, as I've discussed with Roger, and hopefully we'll come back in, the hero in our story, that we want to be the hero. And if we are willing to, as I said, the honesty, saying, okay, we were wrong, we're not the hero, something's wrong, we need to adjust ourselves, then we'll, face the reality. But if we're not willing to face that and saying, okay, my bias was wrong, thinking fast, thinking slow, that my thinking fast didn't come with the right answer, and we're too, fixated on our own self-esteem and ego, we will say, okay, instead of adjusting our knowledge or experience, our biases, we'll say, no, we were right, the world was wrong, and how can we conform the world so that we can maintain this sense of self and this self-esteem? And then that's what we do, that by creating these fantasies, this arrogance, this narcissism, psychopaths, with at varying degrees. It's a spectrum, but to try to then create this resentment, this arrogance, to force the world to conform to our delusional beliefs.
Wow, David, that was wonderful. So that was fantastic. So what you're saying is that everybody has at their edge of consciousness this feeling of discomfort when your views are not quite meshing with what reality is telling you, and it kind of occurs at the edge of your consciousness, and it is very uncomfortable, and it's a negative feeling. And the real choice you have is to actually face it. So it's like facing your shadow, going through the discomfort. This is, Carl Jung's big themes as the solution to handling with it. Instead, what people do, what all of us do to some extent, is to insert this protection between this feeling of discomfort and actually seeing that, something is terribly wrong. You are putting this layer of fantasy of various kinds, and the shape of it is different, whether it is other people, whether it is just false, whether it is pretending that you can do something that you can't. All of those are kind of characteristics of kinds of fantasies. And what are they doing is that they're trying to protect you from this feeling of discomfort. And the real solution is to take the hit, and it requires strength to do that. It requires courage to do that, courage to say that, look,
and resilience.
Yes, I was wrong, and I've been screwing up in a big way, and that is hard. So wonderfully put. Thank you, David. Next up is Brian, Jeff, and Becky. Brian.
So I would, after I signed up, I would just echo what Gene and David said. I like that, the idea of fantasy that David added to Gene's thought. The way I was going to put it, though, a little differently, not dealing with chaos is absolutely perfect, but I think it can also be seen as these resentment, deceit, and arrogance as strategies for dealing with our own limitations. But it is limitations in confronting arrogance. And just as David said, they're just all different forms of fantasy. The only thing I would add is that sometimes, you know, the fantasy is something that you believe in, and sometimes something you do not believe in, but you want others to believe in.
Wonderful. And you introduced the idea of concept of limitations, and that's a huge thing. Like, you know, because all of this kind of saying, it's all about kind of not really accepting your limitations, whether you know, when you're being arrogant, deceitful, or resentful, you're not acknowledging your limitations. You're refusing to do that. And I think there is a close relationship between these as it pertains to other people and it pertains to yourself. And what I've generally found that it's not always, you know, if it's primarily your own deceptions, or, you know, it's about your view of you. That is like the foundational one. And then the other people is kind of secondary. And if those people who think that they can only do this for other people end up actually having some version of it themselves. So I think there is a relationship between yourself and others, and yours seems to be primary. Things like self-resentment, self-deception, you know, arrogance is again about yourself. So I think it's so wonderful. Next up is going to be Jeff, Becky, and Laura. Jeff.
So, so I would, Shrikant, I would build on what you were saying with David and what others have said, that I do think that these three things, the resentment, deceit, and arrogance, are related to our shadows and the discomfort that we feel when we do in some way encounter our shadows. And the reason why it takes courage for us to face it and move through it is that I think the thing that we're trying to protect ourselves from, in terms of whether we're being deceitful with ourselves and not being honest, or whether we're being arrogant with ourselves and others and not able to be, you know, exercise intellectual humility, is that we're trying to protect, one thing we're trying to protect ourselves with there in our shadow is fear. That and it's one of the reasons why it takes courage to be able to move through it. That you know, certainly, you know, arrogance, sort of the fear that I might be wrong, you know, or deceit, you know, the fear that I might be somehow exposed or not be who I wish to be, or even resentment that I might not be powerful enough to be able to overcome whatever I feel has been done to me, or in some way has befallen me. That fear is one aspect of what I'm trying to protect myself from with these three strategies, if you will, or reactions.
Wonderful. Fantastic point. It's just incredible how everybody is bringing up these amazing points. I think it's absolutely right. I think it's the motivation by fear, which is at the root of all of this. And really the solution to that is love. I mean, that's exactly the opposite, you know, because it's not like, you can't really say, okay, don't feel fear. It's like you need to have something positive to get out. You can say, look, if I really am not deceitful, then, you know, if I will be able to do more, actually wanting to do more. So it's like the positive motivation. You know, Jade was talking about the importance of the kiss as opposed to just killing the dragon. Facing, you know, defeating the fear is like facing the dragon. The kiss is the part of love. And you need, I mean, I think there is a beautiful presentation that a dancer called Karen did for us, where she was talking about these two motivations between fear and love. And the way she put it, you know, she does this magnificently. And she's saying most people think of it as like yourself versus other people. She says, no, it's not like that. Like, people who are afraid are in this position. Okay, so they're trying to protect themselves. They are actually they're afraid of what is in them. And they are afraid of what the other people are. So they are like this. She's saying, love is kind of, love or trust is kind of going out, both inside, kind of actually seeing yourself. People are afraid to see themselves. They think that there is something terrible in there. At the same time, they are afraid of other people. They are afraid that there is something bad there. So it's kind of, she's saying you need to kind of spread your wings, you know, both outside, both kind of towards inside and towards others at the same time. So it's either fear of both, or it is trust and love in both. So that's really the heart of the issue. Wonderfully put. Thank you. Next up is Becky, Laura, and Jade. Becky.
As everyone said, I'm going to piggyback off of David. But it's the it's being in your own bubble and separating yourself from the world, or losing that reality check. So I see arrogance as the lens to which you pass your values, and so you're elevating yourself as and your thoughts as superior, which leads to resentment. But the deception is the narrative that continues that spiral, justifying the arrogance and further deepening your resentment that separates you from the world. And so you end up being isolated in your rumination and in your delusion. And in order to really break free from that, it's to either start from the arrogance, have some humility to be like, your thoughts are not always right, or to root yourself back into society and let someone else give that input to you that you're off, you're extremely off in your own world, and it's not true.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. I like the connection between those, you know, kind of causal connection between that. And I think like when you start fixing one of them, you end up fixing all of them, because it's the root causes are the same. Wonderful. So Laura, what do you think is common to all these three? Laura, you need to unmute yourself.
I was gonna say something about what I felt. I went through something where I created a self-victimization, which developed into a resentment, which developed into sort of a hatred, which became a self kind of justification for a story, which became a truth, which was just an excuse for not wanting to tell the truth about a situation that I had created. So what's true in all of it can be a lie. That I think possibility, the basis for which maybe all of it is an arrogance. I think in my case it was kind of an arrogance, but it was associated to fear. And so that's what I think, fear.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. Next up is Jade. Jade, go ahead.
I guess what I want to bring in, I guess, is the concept of pseudo-mutuality, that concept of where things on the surface look really great, but they're not. I feel like that's one place where resentment begins often, is that especially when people are polite and other things, it kind of comes because it's like everyone involved is kind of part of creating the mirage. And it's very hard to distinguish why there is an undertone of resentment, why there is, but that deception, I guess on some level, I don't know if arrogance would be the source, or if it's, I don't know, I guess arrogance, you know, the most arrogant person usually gets the most power and the most whatever. Maybe I'm making that up. I don't know. But I think pseudo mutuality is something to look at, because we usually go along to get along, or get along to go along, or however the phrase goes. So I think I don't have a definitive statement, but I think things like that are worth looking at, and how playing along with something that you know isn't right kind of will breed resentment for yourself, because you know you shouldn't be going along with it, and resentment for the people who are kind of forcing you to make things look great even though they're not.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jade. Really appreciate that. All right, let's do the next question. These answers were incredible, by the way. This was just incredible stuff. So the question is, why do they feel so good? We've kind of talked a little bit about it. And the question is, how do you get past them? What in principle do you do to get past them? What's the solution? So now we talked about the problem. We've seen what is common. What in principle is the solution? How do you go past these? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. Mary, you're first.
I don't know how to, okay, I'll just start. I think that it feels good because resentment and arrogance and deceit, like Maritza was saying, gives us a sense of protection. I would say it's a false sense of protection. And what are we protecting ourselves from? Or I think it's shame. And I'll take it back again, right, to the point that stood out for me is how these three things Peterson says come from not acknowledging our malevolence, right? And so we don't want to face that because shame feels horrible. And well, why would I feel shame for facing my malevolence or my limitations or my imperfections or my not so great choices? It's because I believe a big lie. It's maybe the biggest lie, and that's the lie that my limitations and my imperfections and my not best choices make me shameful. And you know, and that's probably the biggest self-deception, is that we tell ourselves that we're shameful. And so we like Peterson said, like he gives us patience, courage. And I love looking at the etymology of words. And you know, the word courage has the word curl in it, which means heart, which is love. And so when you have courage for yourself, or when someone encourages you, they're giving you love, they're sharing love with you. And so I think that's why it feels so good to hide in those three things. And so I think the solution is to give love to yourself, give love to others, and to ask for help to receive love from others. Thanks.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Mary. That was just wonderful. I have a few things to say, but I'll go ahead and say, I think this question of love versus fear is a very big thing. The second, I think, is that you kind of alluded to it, the concept of perfection that we have. There is something really, really wrong with the concept of perfection that is there. It's like a platonic perfection where people are ashamed of actually being human or something like that, something at a very deep level. So there's something wrong at that level of, you know, with that concept. Next up is going to be Jean, Jyoti, David, Joe, and Dave. Jean.
Yeah, I observed on Facebook especially, people really like to show how good life is, only the highlight part of life. I actually think part of the reason maybe because we try to create order in life. So we try to use that to show, oh, life is really in order. So people can feel safe. And the same thing, I realized a lot of my religious friends, their life looks so perfect. They have family picture every single day. It's like, why you, if you are so happy in your life, why you have to bother take pictures every single event to show other people how great your life is? It seems it's such a big show of, instead we enjoy the moment. They're like busy showing other people, oh, we really enjoy our life. It just so fake. You know, it's like, I think the best way to live is just be honest to yourself. You know, don't believe whatever religion told you is supposed to think. You know, just be true to yourself. Because I think if you live in a lie too long, you cannot tell what is real, what is not real anymore. And then there be disconnected. That's the book I'm reading, you know, second half of your life. Many people have problem because they're living a big lie in their life. They cannot facing it. So the way to do it is be honest to yourself and maybe facing a chaos, smaller piece each time. So slay the dragon little piece at a time. I think it's better for people to healthy mentally, you know, to be that way, even though you may offend some people during the process.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I mean, I really like your point about picture serving as a substitute and like a show to partly to others, but in some ways, I think very deeply to yourself too, of saying, okay, it's like the picture that is replacing the real thing, both for others and for you. So wonderful. So the question, folks, is Brian was asking what the question is. So the question is, what in principle is the solution to these three things? Next up is going to be Jyoti, David, Joe, and Dave. Jyoti. Jyoti, you need to unmute yourself. Let's see, Jyoti. Don't know what happened to Jyoti. All right, let's go with, next is David. David, go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me, to answer your question about how to respond to this, I think that at least what it reminds me of is Jordan Peterson's comments that we need to be able to speak and be able to speak honestly. I mean, to allow all different viewpoints. I mean, this is why I think one of the reasons he's so much a champion of free speech, and that you need to have a group of people. This is why we need to socialize and be with people, to get this feedback from people, to that nobody has the right answer, to be, I mean, again, sort of, if you want to say honest, or accepting that we all need to, as a society, sort of work together to move in the right direction, that we all have these different opinions, these different viewpoints, these different experiences, and that it's through the interaction with all of us that we continually sort of refine our understanding about reality. And that's why we need to be interacting with a lot of people, is to get that feedback from others, from, again, hopefully we trust, hopefully who love us and give us the courage and all these other things, but can give us the feedback to slowly and politely, but sort of push us in the right direction, to help us reassess our views, and everybody else reassesses their views, and we're all sort of collectively being reshaped and being redirected to better understand and our experience in the world that we're living in. So it requires that feedback mechanism.
Wonderful, David. So that's a huge point. The point about actually speech, you speaking and getting the feedback. I want to build a little bit on that. The deepest take that I've seen on the power of speech is by Walter Ong. And we are doing a full meetup on just that. What can language and speech do for you? And what he looks at language, and this is going to be on Sunday at 2:30. One of the scholars who has put together his entire work, this is the last work that he had put together before he died. He had like 4 different drafts of it. And she and one of her co-authors, co-editors put it all together. And they have the concept of language as interpretation. What he's saying is something very profound and very similar to what Jordan Peterson is getting at, is that feedback loop of saying things and listening, writing things, looking at it and correcting them and organizing them, speaking to people, hearing what they have to say, their feedback, hearing people about what you're talking about and responding to them. So it is these loops encoded in language, explicit language, that are pulling together things that are at the edge. We talk about, figure and ground. Language creates the figure, but most of the things that give it power lie in the ground, in the implicit things that you're trying to pull together with those words. And having these loops going on relentlessly from figure and ground through different minds, across different worldviews, different misconceptions, but not necessarily, even if 2 people's views are kind of off a little bit, them interacting with one another provide a corrective mechanism for both. And language as the tool for doing that is a huge, huge thing. But all of that presupposes honesty, because you're saying, I want to actually get at truth. Because language, just as it's an amazingly flexible tool, it can be used for exactly the opposite purpose of actually telling lies to yourself and to others, and to perpetuate those lies very effectively. Language is great for that as well. So thank you, David. Wonderful. Next up is going to be Joe, Dave, and Jade. And Jyoti, if you can unmute, just let me know. I'll put you in line. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. The idea of truth that you just mentioned is obviously a prerequisite, but the idea that taking responsibility for our actions is another key and critical part of this process, as far as overcoming these three things. And there's one part of the book he talks about the idea of expressing gratitude is critical to this process as well. And I think that it is important, because to not be arrogant, to not be angry, to not be resentful, you do have to recognize the beauty in things. And I think that that's a very important part of this process, as far as your personal growth is to see the best of other people around you. So
wow, that's a fantastic point, Joe. I mean, this is like, gratitude is like the antidote to ego that Jyoti was talking about. You're saying, it's not me, it's the world. Is the word, I'm thankful for that. So it is opposite of being resentful. You're saying, I'm grateful for that. So you're just acknowledging that instead of being deceitful. You're saying, I'm grateful for that. So you're saying, it's not you're saying, I'm not arrogant. I'm not saying that it's me who is doing all of this. I'm giving thanks to something that is out there. So that's a beautiful way of saying, okay, that's the antidote. Excellent. Next up is Dave, Jade, and Brian. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. To me, the problem is self-image, or we used to call it inferiority complex. There's something wrong with me. And I'm looking at my friends and they've got it all together. I see they have everything and I don't see their problems. I look at TV, everybody's, tanned and beautiful, jumping around, having a great time. So I've got to find a way to get even. So I start these 3 bad behaviors of lying, cheating, and stealing. And I think the answer is honesty and self-love.
I have to accept myself as I am, and then I can lead an honest life. Thanks for a good topic tonight.
Excellent, Dave. That's a great point. I mean, one of the things is that, I mean, you're talking about television. Jean was talking about Facebook, and it's all about, kind of creations of imagination, which are substituting for honesty or actual memory or actual reality. You're trying to substitute it with these images, and you're making those images very attractive so that you want to just pretend to have that instead of doing the hard work of actually getting something real. So you would rather pretend to have an imaginary thing rather than to actually have a real thing, which is harder, much harder. Next up is going to be Jade, followed by Brian. Jade.
I think it's interesting to bring up the idea of like creating like a false personality online. Because like I have a friend, she puts pictures of a happy family, but she'll tell me that they're miserable, and she'll acknowledge that they're miserable. So everyone's not really deceiving. It's just like, I think back in the day when we didn't have it, we were less aware of how much of a farce things were. It was more like, this is the public persona, because the world isn't necessarily safe enough for us to put that stuff, because when people know stuff, they start talking, they get, it's unfortunately, we don't have a world that's safe enough for us to be honest about our shortcomings, because people like to leverage those. But I guess that's where I get to say, who gets to determine who's lying, what's a lie, and how do we make those determinations? Experts come up with postulations that we determine are wrong all the time. But, we don't sit there and say, well, they kind of get a pass if they're an intellectual. So I just think it's interesting, as even just our perspective on honesty, that is so subjective. So even coming down to like figuring it out, because people have a public persona and a public persona and a private persona, and I don't know if that's lying. Is it? We got to figure that out. So I guess I just raised a question. I didn't really make a statement.
Wonderful, but it's a great point. I mean, one point that you're making is that like people talk about Facebook and television, but this has been going on for a long time. This is a human feature. And there is a lot, it's terms of kind of inner versus outer, like persona versus kind of self-deception. And I think there is both. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, for example, like Carl Rogers talks about authentic relating, or Carl Jung talks about your real self, right? So both of them, they have this magnificent vision of what a human being can be, and in some sense is. Mm-hmm. And they ask the question, so why is it that people are so miserable? Like so many people are so miserable, given that if they are these magnificent beings, how come? Okay, and both their answers, now I'm using like terminology which is kind of neither Carl Jung's or Carl Rogers, but kind of trying to like do a mashup of both of them together. Both of them essentially say is that firstly, people have these self-deceptions, kind of ideas which actually undercut them before they start. So it's like every positive motivation that they have these ideas that stop them internally. Okay, so that's one kind of layer that is there. Then on the top of that, they have these shields. They're all wearing these massive shields to kind of protect them against other people. So there are these magnificent core, beings with magnificent core, with these self-deceptive layers, wearing these giant shields, going and banging against one another. Okay, that's what life looks like. And the solution of Carl Rogers is really, really remarkable and really simple and very powerful. And that is called authentic relating. Like if you actually try to look at another person, okay, I mean, actually try to see who they are, leaving aside your misconceptions of yourself, of them, letting down those guards a little bit, that is tremendously life-giving to both parties. And it's a very simple way, and it can be implemented at all kinds of levels. But it's a very profound point. So thank you. Next up is Brian. No, sorry. Next up is Jyoti, Brian, and Laura. Jyoti.
Yeah, I don't know how I got off the screen, and then I didn't know how to come back. I don't know. Strange things happen here. What I was going to say, if we are on the same subject, developing compassion towards oneself actually helps a lot in arrogance and resentment. If you people who are very hard like this, who are very arrogant and very all the time complaining and resentful, I have noticed that something has gone wrong in their life and they are very hard on themselves. And in order to cover that harshness about themselves, they acquire this kind of a persona that they can show the world they're on top of their game. And actually they are very small inside. So I think developing that Dalai Lama says all the time, be compassionate to yourself and then to the others. And instead of, like I was telling in my breakout room, that too much work was put on me when I was working. And I became resentful of this particular person because she had a physical ailment and she had to take medical time off. And I was sent in her schools to pick up the backlog. So I was resentful until I decided that I'm going to feel sorry for her. She's got a medical problem. And that's okay. And then my bosses are overwhelmed. They don't have that many people to go and help her out. So it helps to become compassionate towards the person who you are against and the world who you are against. So that's my big tip.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Brian, what do you think is the solution?
What
do you think is the solution to resentment, deception, and arrogance?
Well, I think the short answer is something that hit me when Jeff was talking. First of all, what is the problem? What's the problem with these things? The problem is, and this is what it hit me, it's the dark side of yourself. All these things are the dark side trying to deal with chaos and your own personal limitations. And so the solution then suggests itself. The solution to these things is to use your light side to deal with chaos and your limitations. And that light side is what's been fleshed out by you and everyone else by referencing Carl Rogers and compassion and honesty, speaking with each other, authentic relating. All those things I think are part of the light or the bright side.
Wonderful. Folks, we're getting a little bit late, so I want to close with the following. One of the ideas of Jordan Peterson, which is very powerful, is to turn what concepts you have towards others towards yourself. Treat yourself as you would treat somebody that you are responsible for helping. Jyoti has been talking about self-compassion, or just basically the same kind of things that you would do for a friend, doing it for yourself. So it's a very powerful thing because you have the reference point of another person in order to develop the ideas, and then you can just turn that around very easily, because we can think in terms of like persons much better than ideas sometimes. You can think of it as personalities, and you're saying, just like I would help my friend, I'm helping myself. I'm doing the same thing for myself. So I think that's a very powerful tool that Jordan Peterson has it, and I think it's very effective in all of these cases. So folks, I want to say this is just incredible discussion, and I just the level. So I'm really grateful to have this amazing group of people. I think I'm you know, I live in New York, and, you know, things are coming back in New York. You know, many of us have gotten their vaccines, and especially if everybody is vaccinated, you can be outdoors and that's fairly safe. So it's wonderful to see, kind of get the human connection. But I have to say that, you know, during this time, having these meetups has been a huge, huge thing for me, and for, I'm sure, for many of you. And it's all, you know, all of us have done this. So I really appreciate that. And thank you so much. All right. So I look forward to, yes. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. So I will, we look forward to seeing you soon. And all the best. Good evening.
So now going back to Brian
Yeah.
Park.